Welcome to this ACCA video. If you are studying SBR at Strategic Professional, this video is aimed at you. My name is Tom Clendon and I'm an experienced lecturer in preparing students for their ACCA examinations. This video will debrief question 2 from the first ever SBR exam in September 2018. There are other videos in the series debriefing the rest of the exam. In the debriefs, I will be analysing the requirements and showing you how to apply your knowledge effectively. I'll also be looking at some answer plans and consider some alternative answers. In debriefing this question, I'm assuming you have attempted it and have the examination to hand. Let's have a look at question 2 from the September 2018 SBR exam. But the first thing we should really do is understand the requirement. The requirement is broken down into two parts, A and B. And for part A, we're discussing the accounting treatment for two issues. So clearly that lends itself to a very natural structure of looking at accounting issue 1 and accounting issue 2. Part B asks us to look at the ethical issues. Ethics will always be examined in a practical scenario basis. It's not about repeating and regurgitating facts, it's about the application. Now, part B also wants us to talk about actions that we're going to take. So when I look at the requirement of this question, I naturally see the whole answer plan before me. I see that there are 4 distinct, clear things that we are going to do in answering this question. And those 4 things are to deal with the first accounting issue, the second accounting issue, thirdly to deal with the ethics, and lastly to deal with the actions. And you know what? In this question, you've also got a couple of lovely professional marks. It saddens me to share with you that the examiner's report identified a substantial minority of students whose answers were laid out in a confusing way. What I want to do is one thing at a time. And the first thing that I want to do is look at the accounting treatment for the first issue. Then we'll look at the accounting issue for the second issue. Then we'll look at the ethics. And then we'll think about our actions. The first accounting issue relates to the factory subsidence. And this clearly is a problem that's going to require some kind of major repair. Now, the Chief Operating Officer does not think subsidence is an indicator of impairment. Let me just pause for a minute here. Surely subsidence means the asset is damaged. If the asset is damaged, that is an absolute classic indicator of an impairment review. So we must do a review. So a review is required. Yeah? The accounting treatment is wrong. The asset is going to have to be written down to its recoverable amount, and we're going to have to think about whether or not the factory is the production facility is part of a wider cash generating unit. So that's one issue. That's got to be worth a couple of marks. Secondly, there's an argument that no provision should be made for the repair. And do you know what? I agree. Yeah? In terms of a provision, there is no obligation to repair the factory. And too many students go down this route of trying to argue that there is a present obligation. There simply is not. Now, the third issue that we get, and remember this is all for 5 marks and we're just looking at the accounting, is the idea of the revaluation policy and how that the balance of the revaluation surplus, that does none of this balance relates to the production facility, but that this production can be used for any future loss. Well, no, I'm afraid it cannot be. If there is an impairment loss, then the impairment loss must be charged to the P&L. So in terms of the accounting, 2 out of 3 are wrong. This is worth 5 marks. I'm doing part A. I'm doing the accounting only. We've talked about the subsidence. There's now a new heading, there's a new piece of information, there's a new problem, and this is all about the sale of Newell. Now, there is a plan to sell a business which has been approved and reported in the media, and it's been expected that this is going to be completed by X8. Now, although the question doesn't explicitly yet say so, what's going through my mind is whether or not this asset meets the criteria of being held for sale. And indeed, the accountant wishes to show it as being held for sale, and it would appear to be the correct thing to do. But the CEO does not wish this to be disclosed as held for sale, nor does wish to provide for expected losses, because they're worried about things. Now, for me, this would appear to be a held for sale business. The plan has been approved, so there would be separate presentation in the P&L. There's talk of a provision. There's an aggressive behavior that we don't want to provide for anything, and yet there's a bunch of numbers down there which are teasing us to indicate whether or not a provision should be made. Provision is a liability of uncertain timing or amount. Well, we cannot make a provision for future trading losses. Absolutely not. Legal costs that relate to the sale, yes. Redundancies that relate to the disposal, yes, providing they're not ongoing. Impairment, of course, is not something that you provide for. But included within the future losses is an early payment for a leased asset. So that becomes an onerous contract, so we can provide for that. So it's 2 plus 5, plus 6, which means we are making a provision of 13 million in this context. There is this constructive obligation because after all, it has been reported in the media. There's 11 marks knocking around here for the accounting treatment, for discussing provisions, for discussing impairment, for held for sale. Now we need to filter out the ethical angle. Let's have a look at part B. We're now looking at the ethical issues arising from the scenario. So we are re-examining the same information, but thinking about our core ethical values. The suggestion that subsidence is not an indicator of impairment is an error. The suggestion that we can use a revaluation surplus to take an impairment loss on a totally unrelated asset, is an error. Not wishing for Newell to be disclosed as a held for sale is an error. Not wishing to provide for the various legal costs is an error. Now, for me, these errors amount to a lack of competence. And competence is a key characteristic of ethical behavior. But I haven't finished yet, because I think these errors amount to a pattern. I think these errors are a series not of accidental blundering mistakes, but a deliberate series of actions designed to maximize the profit. And if those errors are deliberate, then effectively we are looking at a lack of integrity. We're looking at creative accounting. We're looking at something that is clearly unethical. But I haven't finished yet, because there is also an implication that the accountant may lose their job if they were to put such a provision in the accounts. And technically, they should be putting a provision for some of those things in the accounts. Losing their job, that sounds to me like a threat. That sounds to me like a bullying behavior. That's not ethical, because we need to behave in a professional manner. So this is against professional behavior. So we've got 3 distinct, separate ethical issues being violated, being discussed within this question. And I still haven't finished. This is because the question wants us to consider actions that we would take. So what sort of actions should you be taking when you're faced with such an ethical dilemma? For me, there's 3 fairly standard things that you can do. First of all, you can stand your ground. You can confront, you can argue, you can make your case. However, you might also want to consider getting advice, getting independent advice, finding a senior non-executive director, getting legal advice, something like that. What to do. The third and ultimate sanction that you should consider is resignation. Is that you should consider resigning. So let's recap. Question 2 is always going to be on ethics. It's always going to be examined in that practical accounting way. It's not about regurgitating the 5 pillars, the 5 principles of ethics. It's about applying them. Presentation is key to answering this question. Think about your answer plan. Deal with the accounting issues first, break them down into parts before then dealing with the ethical issues, and try and deal with each ethical issue separately. When it came to the action, I think there's a fairly generic series of pieces of advice that you can give. Talk it through, discuss the issue, confront the issue, seek independent advice, legal advice, go to the non-execs. Finally, think about resigning. Hey, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been a useful debrief for you. Please check out the examiner's report. Please check out the other video debriefs that we have. Please see all the extra resources that we have available on acccaglobal.com.